I thank the Honourable Prime Minister for his contribution to the debate. Honourable members, before we proceed, I wish to remind honourable members that we will closely follow the batting order that has been circulated. There have been exceptions, and I've taken those into account, but strictly the batting order is there. Thank you, honourable members, and I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Sitiveni Rabuka. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise to contribute to this debate on the motion that this House thanks His Excellency the President for his most gracious address. Before I continue, Mr. Speaker, sir, I send out my condolences to the Turang Yabusa of Matan Korvatu in Kalambu on the loss of his wife. And also congratulate the Fiji second 15 for beating the Barbarians. Mr. Speaker, this is the 9th session of Parliament I am in, since I became a member in 1992, serving until May of 1999, and returning in November of last year. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, sir, His Excellency the President's address to his Honourable House, and I say honourable with a lot of misgivings, is the most ungracious I have heard in the Parliament of Fiji.
Order.
Our head of state, Mr. Speaker, sir, our President holds the highest office in the land. The chiefs look up to him. The religious leaders look up to him. The young people look up to him. We, the leaders, look up to him. We look up to him holding that high office, Mr. Speaker, of head of a state, because he is the font of honor. He's the font of authority. He's the font of mercy. Whenever he addresses the nation, he must exude confidence. He must exude peace. He must exude comfort. He must exude hope. And he must exude cheer and joy. Even if he has to be the bearer of sad tidings, he must deliver it to the people in a language and a tone that forges unity and inspires confidence and mobilizes the nation and its people to be bold and resolute, to tackle the challenges and overcome evil and the results of misadventures and prevail. That is what a head of state should do in a national address, Mr. Speaker, and the address must be given gracefully. The government must take responsibility for putting our head of state into this embarrassing position of reading an address that is a poor and wrong impression of the person we have as our president. Our president, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a decorated military officer. He's a former force commander of the then biggest United Nations peacekeeping operation going on in the world. He was in command of more than 10,000 military personnel and thousands of international and locally recruited civilian staff. His office was staffed by some of the most efficient and professional military and civilian staff, especially selected by the participating countries of the United Nations. His speeches were, in his own words, expressing his own will and the mission, and crafted by these experienced staff. They had to be couched in such a way that all heads of state, all heads of government that come to the United Nations would continue to support the efforts of the forces he commanded to carry out the mandate set for it by the various United Nations resolutions in order to restore peace in the Middle East and the world. His addresses and reports to the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Security Council had to be grateful, confidence-inspiring, and gracious. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the address he was made to deliver in this honourable House on Tuesday last week was unfit to be delivered by our head of state our president, who has had an illustrious career in our own military forces, who has had a distinguished time to command in the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon as its force commander, for which he was honored by 2 member nations of the United Nations and our own College of Honor, and a former loyal civil servant of our country. Mr. Speaker, to do justice to our head of state, who has had a finger on the pulse of the nation for more than 3 decades, and is aware of the real situation on the ground, and has not been hoodwinked by the government's propaganda machine, and the government should have given him the free hand to deliver to the nation a message he was comfortable with, delivered it from his heart as a true patriot of Fiji. On the day after the nation paid its respect to those and made the supreme sacrifice of life in the 2 world wars, in the Malayan emergency, and in peacekeeping operations around the world. Mr. Speaker, recalling the wreath-laying ceremony on Remembrance Day, Monday, November 11th, I distinctly remember the roll of honor read out by the President of the Returned Sailors and Ex-Servicemen Association of Fiji. In World War I, of the 124 who were killed in action, died of wounds or natural causes in the theaters of war, there were 10 Itoke names, and the rest, 114, were English or European names. On the World War II roll of honor, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the 50 killed in action or died of wounds or natural causes in the war theater, 11 were English or European names, and the rest, 39, were Itoke names. On the Malayan emergency roll of honor, of the 18 that were killed in action or died of wounds or of natural causes in the theater, and that included casualties to malaria, Mr. Speaker, 3 had English or European names, 1 Maori name, and the rest, 14, were Itoke names. And on peacekeeping missions, Mr. Speaker, sir, in Lebanon, MFO Sinai, UNDOF in Golan Heights, UNMISAT, East Timor, UNMISS, South Sudan, and the police UN missions in Kosovo, Namibia, Iraq, and Ramsey in the Solomon, there were 2 European or English names, 2 Indian names, and the rest, 16, were Itoke names. The Fijians and British Army roll of honor, there were 4 English names, 1 Indian name, and the rest, 43, were Itoke names. When I look around this chamber, Mr. Speaker, sir, only one of us has an English name, or Irish, and that is the Honorable Alexander O'Connor. Mr. Speaker, sir, His Excellency, in his salutation, used 4 languages. Nisambula Minaka, Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, Noaya Maori, and a very good morning to you all. Yet, we the members of this House cannot use the native Fijian language in this chamber. In his closing thanks, he used the same 4 languages, Mr. Speaker, sir. He referred to the 6-year-old Shavnil Kumar, who, to use His Excellency's own words, unabashedly called himself Fijian. The President was referring to our Constitution that was unilaterally decreed into force by force on the people of Fiji. All previous constitutions, Mr. Speaker, sir, considered the contribution of ethnic groups in Fiji in the development, in the defense, and the economy, and allocated seats in Parliament to preserve the nation's respect for ethnic groups' roles in the history of our nation. Speaking about the Constitution, the President said, and I quote, "Only 6 short years since the launch of our 2013 Constitution, we are undoubtedly still living some of the most consequential chapters of our history. As the journeys of many of the world's great democracies and economically powerful nations have taught us, the quality of our leadership in these formative years will be defining for our political system. Is the assault on the physically and visually impaired Honorable Pio Tikondundua on Constitution Avenue a demonstration of the quality of our leadership that will define our political system, Mr. Speaker, sir?" His Excellency said, and I quote, "I can recall the patriotic euphoria that gripped our nation following the successful conduct of our 2014 general election. I have watched with growing pride as that excitement has produced higher public expectations for the rights we enjoy, the opportunities at our disposal, the impact of our voices at home and overseas, and the conduct of our elected leaders. Mr. Speaker, sir, what has happened to that patriotic euphoria? The general elections of 2018 showed the opposite of patriotic euphoria. The governing party, in spite of all the friendly voters-friendly programs, in 6 years since the decree promulgated Constitution, lost votes in the 2018 general election. They lost in the winning percentage and lost on seat counts. Also, in spite of voters' population increase by natural as well as naturalization growth. Mr. Speaker, sir, you and I and the Honorable Assistant Minister for Health attended Blue Breakfast in aid of the Diabetes Association of Fiji, in unity with the rest of the world on World Diabetes Day, Thursday, the 14th of November. In your speech this morning, sir, you said that 3 in every 10 people in Fiji of today are living with diabetes. You said it was an alarming statistic. You said it was an alarming situation. Mr. Speaker, sir, when 3 in every 10 voters registered to vote did not turn up to vote, it is an alarming statistic. It is an alarming situation. Certainly not a patriotic euphoria. His Excellency said he has, and I quote, "worked with growing pride as that excitement has produced higher public expectations for the rights we enjoy, the opportunities at our disposal," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, sir, how have that excitement and higher expectations been manifested in our national life? There has been a marked increase in drug-related offenses being investigated and prosecuted, and not by the run-of-the-mill people involved in illegal cultivation and trade in marijuana, but by higher-profile figures in our society. This is definitely a sure indicator of low national morale, certainly not growing pride and higher public expectations, Mr. Speaker. The recent attacks on our police personnel, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates a general lack of respect for law and order and a definite sign of low national morale. Our talented rugby players, Mr. Speaker, who represented us in the Rugby World Cup recently completed in Japan, showed how low national morale can reduce a great, talented, young, world-class rugby players to a low-impact rugby team on the field. The story and clippings of the Honorable Minister for Defense, Honorable Colonel Inyas Ratu, trying to make them pay attention while presenting their jerseys at night, confirm low morale, the result of poor management, poor coaching, poor leadership, and above all, Mr. Speaker, sir, poor national leadership that has failed to give them a nation and a society that they will have felt patriotically proud to have represented and played for. I congratulate once again the Fiji second 15 for beating the Barbarians, and I pay my respect to the captain of our team in 1970 who still lives in Nandi, Ratusela, Tonga, and the others of my colleagues who went on that tour that made history by first to beat the Barbarians at home 29-9. This second 15 beat them again last night or the night before, and I congratulate them. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency also read out these words, and I quote, "The impact of our voices at home and overseas." Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, Fiji sent a delegation to the Human Rights Council session in Geneva, where the working group on the Universal Periodic Review reports were tabled. The Fiji delegation was led by our acting Chief Justice, the Honorable Justice Kamal Kumar, with the Fiji DPP and Commissioner of Police, among others. While Fiji agreed with many of the recommendations and the findings, there was an additional 55 that Fiji had to specifically address and comply with. Many of the issues brought up by the rapporteurs that examined Fiji are issues we cannot hide particularly from the eyes of our own people, who say no matter how grand sounding our own people, no matter how grand sounding our delegates may be on the international stage, we in Fiji know better. Many of the issues about our human rights, group rights, rights of detained persons, and particularly our rights as indigenous native peoples of Fiji and Rotuma have not been fully recognized, even those that do not negatively impact or impinge on the rights of all other non-indigenous persons and groups. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the impact of our voices at home and overseas, as His Excellency put it, sounds tinny and hollow. In fact, it's like Macbeth said in one of his most studied soliloquies, tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow. Creeps in this petty face from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard of no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, sir, I came to this chamber before 9 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of November, to wait for the opening and the opening address. While waiting, I made the following notes. Listen to the address. What of last year's address will be reiterated? What of last year's promises have been realized? What of last year's promises have been allocated funds in the 2019-2020 budget? How much of what opposition members' input in the year have been incorporated into policy statements to come from the address? What is the government legislative program for the year? And prepare my response. Mr. Speaker, there was no reference to what His Excellency said last year. To give us an indication of how much contained in that address has been answered in the past year. His Excellency did not specifically relate the promised development to the budget for this year. None of the opposition input into the debate in the last session found its way into the address for incorporation into government actions. He did mention that there will be bills brought before this Honourable House about Climate Change Act, the Cybercrime Bill to align our national regulation with the Budapest Convention, the Natural Disaster Management Act 1998, the Excise Act of 1986, Customs Act, VAT Act, and Republic of Fiji Military Forces Act of 1949, and agricultural laws to ensure their effectiveness in a rapidly modernizing world and avoid hiccups in service delivery. There was a promise to continue the reforms that we are waiting for, which means we continue to wait for the reforms. There was a lecture on the functions of the committees of Parliament, which we all know are not unbiased in their reporting because of the participation of members who are part of the executive of government and must comply with government party lines, totally negating the objective of committees, which is to hear submissions, make balanced reports to the House on the merits and demerits of the proposals, bills, reports, etc. Mr. Speaker, the address had nothing to inspire confidence in the minds of investors in Fiji, who have watched their investment threatened by bad management of our economy. Our projected growth for the year was recently revised downwards again, this time to 1%. We hope it will not be further revised downwards to a negative figure by the end of the year. Some businesses are contracting or closing, Mr. Speaker, indicating a lack of confidence in the government. The sugar industry, Mr. Speaker, sir, continues to wallow in its own pool of mill mud and nothing was mentioned in the address to address this very important industry, which has been the mainstay of our economy since the colonial days. Our crime rate and nature is worsening, the surface indication of a very fast declining national morale, in spite of freebies and handouts and the various care programs. Mr. Speaker, one of the lectionary readings yesterday, Sunday the 17th of November, was the second epistle of Paul, Silas, and Timothy to the people in the church in Thessalonica. It's their second letter in chapter 3, verses 6 to 13, where they are urging leaders, they're urging the people to do honest work, even to the extent that they propose that those that do not work do not deserve to eat. Before ending, Mr. Speaker, I want to send out my greetings to Mr. and Mrs. Ashok Prasad of B. Prasad and Sons of Fletcher Road, Batwanga. Mrs. Shrimati Prasad celebrated her birthday on Saturday, and she was very happy to welcome home for the celebration two of their daughters living successfully in New Zealand. Mr. and Mrs. Prasad are devout Hindus who follow the teachings of Jesus Christ better than most Christians. Their special and honored guests on Saturday night, as have been in all their celebrations, including Diwali, were the children from the Fiji Society for the Blind in Botswana. Congratulations, Mrs. Shrimati Prasad, and thank you for demonstrating the kind of love we must all strive to show. As Jesus said, when you do these to one of the least in my kingdom, you do them for me. Congratulations, Mrs. Prasad, on your birthday, and congratulations to the Prasad family for being gracious hosts and for being gracious about life. Mr. Speaker, sir, our government has not been gracious. Our government has been failing the people of Fiji. I call on the Prime Minister to do the honorable thing, if he can find it in himself, and resign. Advise His Excellency the President. Advise His Excellency the President to call for fresh elections so that the people of Fiji can give a fresh mandate to its representatives to bring this country and its people out of the political doldrums and the economic dump we are in and we stand on. They have mismanaged the economy. They have frustrated the police. They have frustrated the DPP and embarrassed our president by giving him an address that he should never have been given. While with these words, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that the address was not a gracious one, and as a true patriot of Fiji, I must not and will not agree with the motion before the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.